What happened to the companies that Kevin O'Leary called out as scams? Now, although we've seen amazing ideas pitched on Shark Tank over the years, not all of them turn out to be as great as the entrepreneurs claim them to be. And Kevin O'Leary is definitely an investor you don't want to cheat. So what happened to these companies after being called out as scams on national TV? Did they manage to survive after Shark Tank? And was Kevin O'Leary right when he called these companies scammers? Stick around to find out.
Hi Sharks, my name is Belinda Jasmine and I'm from Sand City, California.
Back in October 2015, on the 5th episode of Season 7 of Shark Tank, Belinda Jasmine came into the tank to pitch her company, the Skinny Mirror. The California native came seeking a $200,000 investment in exchange for 20% stock share in her company. Now, what is the Skinny Mirror? Well, it's a regular mirror at first glance, only this one is going to give you a reflection making you seem 2 to 3 dress sizes smaller. Yup, it's basically a mirror with an outright slimming effect. Belinda came up with this idea when she took a look at herself in the mirror and noticed that she had appeared 5 to 10 pounds heavier than she was. And as it turns out, most of the full-length mirrors in circulation are all made in this way, more of a fattening visual effect than slimming. She also found that the crooked frame of the mirror was somehow distorting the glass and changing her perception of herself in the process. And when she tried to get a new skinnier mirror, she couldn't find any to buy. So she came up with the Skinny Mirrors business. According to Jasmine, the aim of this business was to give mirrors that inspire people to improve their diet and physical activity once they see a positive reflection of themselves in the mirror. Clothing stores noticed an 18% boost in sales using that mirror because it made customers feel good about their bodies and the outfits they were wearing. To take her business further, Belinda came to Shark Tank and began her pitch by announcing that she did want $200,000 for 20% stock position. After introducing her product, she asked the Sharks to step up and test it out. Reiner and Damon were very enthusiastic to try it out. Lori stepped up to the demonstration area, and straight away, she could see the effect. She admitted she looked far skinnier. And even Robert Herjavec noticed that her head looked smaller in that mirror. Damon also tried it out and saw the effects. All Cuban got from Damon's reflections were jokes. And it raised Robert's first question. He noticed that this mirror had a more noticeable effect on Lori's reflection than Damon's, which led Belinda to explain that it had to do with Damon's distance from the mirror. She also added that the ideal place to stand is 3 to 5 feet away. Everyone else was cracking jokes and having a good time, but not Kevin O'Leary. Just by looking at his facial expression, you can tell he's waiting to call this product a scam. So he pointed out that the mirror essentially promotes falsehood and nothing else. And that's something no one could argue with. But Kevin wasn't done just yet. He went on to point out that the motivation to lose weight is to look at one's body and notice the need to shed some pounds, not looking at a could-be image of yourself. While Mark Cuban was still having a laugh at his image, Robert was focused on the sales of the product rather than the ethics behind it. Belinda then revealed that she had sold around 350 units of Skinny Mirror, all for a total of $85,000 before coming to the show. She added that the mirror really wasn't aimed at a consumer market, hence all her sales were from clothing stores and hotels. And this made Kevin once again see her as a scammer. Why? Well, even you would have to agree that the entire premise of the business model Jasmine was promoting was to sell to retailers who then got to sell them as a false premise of appearing better. It's really just fooling the customer into buying a dress because a certain mirror makes you look good, whereas it might not look good, probably leading to disappointment. O'Leary pointed it out, and Cuban quickly agreed, but Belinda isn't settling for any slander on her company. So she pointed out that a test market study was done in Sweden the previous year, and tried to use the results of a survey to defend her product. She mentioned that the survey showed that women who used the Skinny Mirror bought around 20% more outfits. Cuban replies to this by saying, of course they did. Following that, she also said she discovered that women were more satisfied with their real bodies than the ideal body portrayed in advertising. She goes on to say that the poll also found Skinny Mirror helped narrow the gap between women finding their real bodies and their dream ones. Kevin and Robert identified this point as the problem with the product, but Belinda interrupted with her fourth point from the survey. This is because women assume they're 2 to 3 sizes bigger in a mirror than they are in reality. She even reported this fact by telling the Sharks that she took the survey herself and believed she was 2 to 3 sizes larger. All of these didn't change Robert or Kevin's point of view though. Robert, for one, wanted to know if the stores let their customers know they're using a special mirror. Belinda replied by saying she turned down a $700,000 order from a big-name retailer because they demanded she remove the logo on the bottom right corner of the mirror mirror, which reads skinny, so as to outrightly fool customers. Belinda goes on to explain the consumer model retails for $165, and that she didn't have a patent on the technology but believed the intention and branding of the product was more important.
Belinda, you don't have a patent on this technology. Anybody can order that piece of glass.
Exactly.
At this point, Kevin had enough. He refused to take a look at himself in the mirror, calling the product a sham, and exited the deal. He takes it a step further by telling the others not to even try with this product.
Have you taken a look at yourself in the mirror?
Look, you know, I deal in reality. I will not be part of this sham.
Of course, the Sharks aren't listening to him, but it's not long before they too tap out of the deal. First out is Cuban, seeing that the brand selling point is uncertain. Next is Robert, feeling the mirror's a deception that can be uncovered if the customer looks in any regular mirror. Damon also taps out for a similar reason, leaving Lori. Lori then wants to know the story behind the idea, but it doesn't do enough to convince her. She can see the ethical dilemma the product suffers with, so she's also out. Belinda walks out of the tank without anything, but for the next couple of years, the business seemed to be doing quite okay. More retailers became open to the idea, and in 2018, the skinny mirror was available for only retail and bulk for $295. However, more recently, the business has gone quiet. Belinda's now a YouTuber, but Skinny Mirror appears to be out of business. Looked like Kevin O'Leary's prediction was right. At least her pitch was based on a deceptive product and not on scientific jargon. Now our next product is from Season 3, Episode 11, sounding like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. The only surprise is how long it took before Kevin called it a scam. The product is the Sullivan generator. The inventor, Mark Sullivan. The pitch, $1 million for 10%. We've seen crazy pitches on Shark Tank, but this one stands out as one of the craziest.
My name is Mark Sullivan, and I'm an inventor with over 1,000 inventions.
Mark Sullivan, a scientist from San Antonio, Texas, with a degree in physics and biomedical engineering, is a serial inventor who has multiple patents. In fact, at the time he entered the tank, he claimed to have made over 1,000 inventions during his career, some of which have been granted patents. This guy's clearly a genius and visionary, wanting to leave his mark on the world with his inventions. So he set out to harness the force produced by the spin of the Earth, called the Coriolis effect. Now his theory for doing so is that hurricanes have sufficient energy to power a gadget that produces gold, manganese, electricity, and drinking water. So the idea was to build a machine that could make synthetic storms, hence the Sullivan generator. Now the device works by collecting salt water, turning it into water vapor, and taking it to a vortex chamber, which turns on the turbines that run the entire process. He'd applied for a patent to protect his brainchild. All that was left were the funds to make it come true. And where better to get that than on Shark Tank? So Sullivan came into the tank, briefly introduced himself, and then told the Sharks his asking price of $1 million in exchange for 10% stake in the Sullivan generator. He then goes on to explain his generator as an electric one, harvesting energy from Earth's natural rotation. Sullivan takes his time explaining the whole complicated science of his machine, and then captured the Sharks' attention by revealing that the mineral byproducts left behind in the generator are manganese and gold. Oh, you heard that right, gold.
The waste products precipitates manganese and gold.
What?
Gold.
Gold?
Gold.
G-O-L-D.
G-O-L-D.
And not just specks of gold, but according to Sullivan, they could make an anticipated $97 billion in the collection of gold. At this point, he had all the Sharks' attention. I mean, who doesn't love gold? Mark added that he had planned to set up at least 200 of these generators to be controlled over the internet. Straight away, Kevin O'Leary has his first question for the genius inventor.
Mark, how long are you visiting Earth?
Yeah, you can smell Kevin not buying it. Moving on, after answering Mark Cuban's obvious question about his background, Sullivan shows the Sharks a model of what the vortex chamber inside the generator would look like. Let's just say he got a little too scientific with terms and explanations, so Damon immediately drops out of investing, if not for any other reason because of his ignorance towards highly scientific matters. Robert here wants to know more, and is asking for clarification about the idea of gold being left behind after hurricanes. Sullivan confirms the idea and adds that per every 1 cubic mile of salt water, you could harvest 1,500 tons of gold. But then, How does he plan on sifting through as much as 1 cubic mile of salt water? Easy. Sullivan plans on making his generator 100 feet tall.
Yeah, but you still got to be able to process a cubic mile of water, of ocean water. It's enormous.
You'd expect they'd heard enough, but not just yet. Instead, they ask how long it'd take to complete that project if he got the funding, to which he replied, 9 months. Cuban doesn't believe that estimate and feels something about the whole project just feels off for him. So he's out. The remaining 3 sharks still find Sullivan's character a bit odd and want to know more about his other inventions. He then reveals that he collects a royalty on artificial hearts because he invented those and dabbles in music and fashion design. He goes on to add that his other inventions make about $1 billion annually.
What about the other 999 inventions? Did you ever make any money with those?
They all laugh about it, but Herjavec heads back to business, asking how the business could make in gold if he gave Sullivan a $50,000 investment instead of $1 million. He might have been still gathering his words to give a proper reply, but Barbara interrupted, saying that she wouldn't be investing at all. And then Kevin O'Leary followed suit. Why? Well, he simply believes the technology here is very interesting, but not worth the risk. O'Leary also seems convinced that it's a scam, that Robert Herjavec immediately follows suit, leaving Mark Sullivan walking away without any deal. He didn't give up on his project just yet, and went ahead to try to sell the idea to South Texas Mensa Society, but got rejected again. Since then, both the idea and the scientist behind it have gone silent. The only available info is from Sullivan's website, where he uploads his various projects and inventions. Other than that, the idea of the Sullivan generator is believed to be worth an estimated $100,000. But no one's willing to take a chance on this too-good-to-be-true technology or the wacky scientist behind it. And to wrap it up, we have one more product being called out as a scam by Kevin O'Leary. And this one is from the pilot episode back in August 2009. It might have been the first episode of Shark Tank, but this pitch still remains one of the most awkward and out of sync the tank has ever seen.
My name is Darren Johnson.
For some, this idea already comes off as disgusting, and for others, it just sounds like the origin story of a comic book villain. The invention is named the Ionic Ear, and it was invented and pitched by Darren Johnson. The Ionic Ear is an alternative to regular Bluetooth devices, but here's where it gets awkward. To use it, it would require surgery near the ear. You see, what Darren wanted to do was have people avoid the trouble with those regular wireless devices that can fall out or get easily lost. Instead, the Ionic Ear would be surgically implanted in your ear canal, and then you just charge yourself with a cotton swab-sized charger every night. To Darren, it was a business that needed investment to fly, despite never having tested it on anybody. He straight came up into this tank, looking for $1 million for 15% stake, and he starts his pitch by pointing out the downsides of traditional Bluetooth and headset devices.
I'm looking for $1 million.
Now, Damon initially thought Darren was referring to implanting the Bluetooth into another device, such as a phone, only for Darren to explain it would actually go into the ear with surgery. To explain his device, he showed pictures of the operation on a monitor. The pictures kind of detail where the operation would take place and what the gadget would include, such as a microphone. Hey, we did say that some people would find it disgusting, and Damon John falls into that category, being immediately disturbed by this whole thing, so he's out.
I can sum up where I stand on this already. It's pretty disturbing, and it freaks me out. I'm already out.
Robert, always the inquisitive one, went ahead to ask how the device would be charged, to which Darren replied that a charging port would be stuck into the ear every night before going to sleep. That was enough info to irritate Kevin Harrington as well, so he announced he was out. Barbara Cochran couldn't believe her ears, so she asked him to re-explain this whole thing to confirm she wasn't crazy. He re-explained, and then Robert brought up the issue of having to go through surgery again to get an upgrade. At this point, Barbara couldn't take it anymore, and she said she was out, adding that this was the weirdest thing she had ever heard. Now, what was Darren's defense for this obviously disturbing idea? Well, he compared it to breast implants and how market acceptability was required for individuals to attempt it. Kevin O'Leary walked out at that moment, expressing his amazement that Darren was still alive. Robert was in sync with O'Leary and told Darren he felt he was somewhere between insanity and genius before going out as well. O'Leary then concluded this pitch by saying he thought Darren was so much ahead of his time, to which Damon answered that he was glad he wouldn't be living if this notion had come true. And that was it. All the investors were out. This time, it was really no surprise. Darren walked out of the tank without any investment, and that seemed to be the last we heard of both him and the Ionic Ear. Maybe having a test run before getting on the show could have assisted his pitch. Or how about a review of the idea, a doctor report, maybe some medical implications, who knows? But coming on the tank demanding $1 million investment on something so absurd and at the same time untested? It's just crazy. It's something Barbara, for one, would never forget. She even brought it up in a special retrospective segment on the series' 100th episode and called it the worst pitch. When we asked to compare it with the Sullivan generator, Barbara added, "He was at least friendly. He wasn't as scary as Bluetooth guy. He smiled a little, but crazy things. They keep it interesting. At least we can give them that. Plus, they had the idea and the audacity to come on the show. It's just that Kevin O'Leary and the other Sharks wouldn't let these things slide on their show." Please subscribe for more Shark Tank update videos like this and turn on those notifications. If you had a good time, leave a like, and we want to thank you for watching.